Constitutional law expert, advocate Michael Osborne joins us now to share his views on what's been happening lately, particularly with regards to the possibility of the report being taken on review by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So, as I've just said, we're hearing that the President intends taking a legal review of the Section 89 independent panel's adverse report on the Phala, which was released earlier this week. Now, will this decision have any impact on due process that was meant to follow at Parliament after it was handed over to the Speaker?
Good evening to you. The situation is fluid and it involves both political and legal dimensions. But yes, the President is quite entitled to take the Section 89 panel report on review. It's a procedurally difficult situation because quite often a review of this import could take quite a few weeks or months to get before a court. Obviously, there's not the luxury of time, given firstly the meeting of Parliament this coming week and then the ANC meeting thereafter. So one imagines that the formal court papers seeking review will be filed within the next day or two. And what will have to happen is the parties will have to agree to request that the High Court give a special priority, treat this as an urgent application, such that it can be heard perhaps as early as next week. But that, of course, puts a question mark over whether the process in Parliament can go ahead as planned on Tuesday.
Would there be a preference or a appointed court which would be the first port of call for President Ramaphosa to approach, given talk of seeking to impeach him? So would it be obviously the Constitutional Court that has to deal with the review, legal review of the report?
Well, the initial port of call would ordinarily be the High Court, but it may well be that in view of the urgency and the extraordinary import of this, that it would go to the Constitutional Court. The problem is the Constitutional Court consists of 11 judges, as opposed to the single judge that would often sit at the High Court, and getting 11 judges together on very short notice is not easy, especially since, given the season that we're moving into. So it's really an extraordinary and unpredictable situation. Remember that what is due to start this week in Parliament, though, is not the plenary session in which the Parliament as such, or the House of Assembly as such, would have to decide whether to impeach, which requires a 2/3 majority. The next step procedurally is for the impeachment committee to sit and consider the Section 89 committee report and decide what to do with it. It's entirely conceivable that the impeachment committee would say that, well, whatever the former Chief Justice has said, they don't think that this is a matter that deserves or warrants going to the Parliament sitting as a whole. The impeachment panel or committee itself would need at least, I would think, the balance of the week. So, as I say, it's a very acute and quite unique question of timing and different moving parts, which somehow have to be coordinated.
Just in terms of the terminology, prima facie case or case to answer, this is obviously what the report says. Does it amount to the same thing in terms of the president? And can you be found guilty of possible wrongdoing? And this is in light of what the panel itself says in terms of their findings.
Well, yes, the panel used very careful, measured language in its conclusion, saying that there may be a prima facie case to answer. And I must say that some of the media has been irresponsible in the way it's covered it. It is speaking in terms of a scathing report or a damning report. It's really nothing of the sort. The Section 89 panel did its job. It's not within its power to call witnesses or to demand documents. It's essentially fulfills a kind of a passive role in which it looks only at the documentation that happens to be placed before it. And the panel was careful to say that many of the allegations against the president were hearsay. And it has to make its conclusion tentatively based upon the rather limited evidence before it.
Now, there have been differences of opinion about the Executive Members Act, what it demands of the president under the circumstances under review, the extent of his obligation to report fraud or theft to the police, and how. I'd like to hear what your opinion and or interpretation is some of these issues. And are some of these discussions legal discussions or just mere political conjecture on what we are seeing and receiving?
Well, there's two dimensions. There of course is the matter of legal interpretation, very carefully explored by the Section 89 committee. And then separate to that, there's a whole political debate. As for the legal side, there's really two questions at stake that the Section 89 panel had to determine. First of all, the Constitution, buttressed by the legislation, provides that the President and members of the Cabinet may not take up paid employment. That's the phrase that's used, paid employment. Now, the president, one imagines, would argue on review that holding an interest in a closed corporation that owns a lodge, a farm, that doesn't constitute paid employment. The president is not being paid a salary, clearly. He may be drawing some sort of benefit, but it's not a form of paid employment. The Section 89 panel took the view that this is a matter of interpretation, that it's not impossible, or it's a viable interpretation of the term paid employment, that it should be read broadly in order to include an indirect or even a direct financial interest that does not involve an employment relationship. So that's something that's going to be argued. It's by no means clear cut. Then the second legal issue that arises is this. Under the Prevention of Corruption Act, there are obligations with regard to the reporting of serious crimes, which would include the theft of an amount of 100,000 rand or more. Now, it appears that the allegation then is that the president failed to report this theft to the South African police services. Now, it turns out, it appears, based upon the prima facie evidence that we have, is that a report was indeed made, but it was made to General Rood, head of the security detail of the president, who of course is a member of the South African police. He's a very senior member. And it appears that General Rood, in turn, reported the matter to his senior. And the report went very far up in the police hierarchy. What did not happen is that it appears no report was made to the local police station. That's the issue then. So the question is, well, does it satisfy the requirement of reporting it to the police to make the kind of reporting that was made here, rather than in addition going down to the local charge office and putting in a report?
Well,
so that again is a matter of interpretation.
It's a pity we've run out of time, but I really appreciate you speaking to us and sharing your views about some of these developments. We're speaking here about news that the president is looking to take the Section 89 panel findings on legal review.